As he lies, denies, and delays during peace negotiations, Vladimir Putin's goal has always been to convince Ukraine's Western allies that supporting the nation amounts to throwing their weight behind a lost cause. Putin's problem is that most of Ukraine's allies aren't listening. The UK is one of those allies, and far from being convinced by Putin's talk, the country is doing more than most to support Ukraine in its fight. And it's on the verge of doing something that will ruin Putin's entire year. The UK is building something important for Ukraine, a never-before-seen weapon that could end up being a game-changer in the war. Why? Because this weapon is a ballistic missile. According to the Kyiv Post, in a January 12th article, the UK has provided an update on an initiative dubbed Project Nightfall. Under this initiative, the UK aims to produce a ballistic missile capable of traveling over 500 kilometers or 310 miles, while resisting electronic warfare countermeasures, specifically for use by Ukraine against targets in occupied Ukraine and on Russian territory. The missile that will be developed under the project has taken a step closer to becoming a reality, as the UK has announced a competition among several defense contractors. The winner will have proven it can build the missile and will receive the go-ahead, along with the lucrative funding that comes with it to get to work on production. The UK's Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry, Luke Pollard, says that the UK Ministry of Defence aims to find 3 development teams, all of which are to receive a £9 million or about $12 million contract to design, develop and deliver their first 3 missiles under Project Nightfall within the next 12 months for initial test firings. If one of those 3 teams is successful, that team will be then contracted to build 10 missiles per month. In a joint statement released alongside the UK's Secretary of State John Healey, Pollard has also confirmed that many of these missiles will end up in Ukraine's hands, though their development will also influence the future of the UK's armed forces. Nightfall is a project focused on rapid prototyping, spiral development, resilience to electronic warfare, and the ability to scale manufacturing quickly, particularly in the UK, the joint statement reads. Whilst aimed at supporting Ukraine, Nightfall will also inform future UK armed forces long-range strike projects, the duo adds. Project Nightfall isn't brand new. Its existence has been known since August 2025, the Kyiv Post reports. In that month, the UK publicised its plans to develop a new short-range ballistic missile that could be used by Ukraine, though additional details were thin on the ground at the time. By December, the UK's Ministry of Defence revealed a little more about what it intends for the new missile to do via the release of project tender requirements. Those requirements offer information about what this new missile will deliver to Ukraine once it's completed. Military confirms the intended 500-kilometer range, which is interesting in its own right. Assuming that range is reached or, as the UK intends, exceeded, that would mean the Project Nightfall missile will be able to travel about twice the distance of the export variety of the Storm Shadow missiles the UK has already provided to Ukraine. Per Army recognition, the new missile would also come close to matching the 560-kilometer or 347-mile range of the domestic version of the Storm Shadow. In that context, Pollard and Healey's comments about the new missile shaping the future of the UK's armed forces as much as Ukraine's starts to make a lot more sense. The missile won't replace Storm Shadow, but it will be a heck of a competition. Beyond the range, the Project Nightfall missile is also being developed specifically with Russia's electronic warfare or EW capabilities in mind. This is one area in which Russia excels. Back in May 2024, Military Watch magazine quoted former US Department of Defense officer David T. Pine as claiming that Russia has a major EW advantage over much of the world. Russia has the most capable electronic warfare systems in the world, with the longest range and most powerful GPS and radio frequency jammers of any nation, Pine said at the time. He added that he was impressed by the speed at which Russian long-range jammers have been able to adapt to jamming new US and NATO weapon systems that have been introduced into the conflict. According to Pine, Russia's EW capabilities had led to 90% of the guided missiles and drones that the US had supplied to Ukraine missing their targets. That's a massive waste of money and firepower that Ukraine wants to avoid. Project Nightfall is intended to solve this EW problem. Military says that the missile is intended to withstand Russia's advanced EW capabilities, meaning the missile should still function even when Russia is jamming its GPS and whatever other satellite signals it's receiving. The result will be a missile that should still be able to hit its targets regardless of the EW countermeasures that Russia deploys. And if the UK delivers what it intends, that EW resistance will mean that Ukraine only has to focus on mitigating the risks posed by Russia's more tangible air defense assets whenever the missile is used. And when the missile hits its target, it should do so with devastating power and accuracy. The UK says that its winning contractor needs to develop a missile that can carry a warhead weighing 200 kilograms, which amounts to about 440 pounds. There are heavier hitting missiles and drones in Ukraine's arsenal, but this amount of firepower is enough to cause major damage to the types of targets Ukraine would want to hit with Project Nightfall, such as command centers and logistics hubs in the deep rear and inside Russia itself. Those targets will also face the massive problem of a ballistic missile that is extremely accurate, again as long as the contractor that the UK chooses delivers on the country's requirements. Project Nightfall is intended to achieve a target deviation of no more than 5 meters, or about 16.4 feet, so only the smallest of targets will have a chance of avoiding its explosive fury. Command centers and logistical hubs aren't exactly known for being small, so the UK's new ballistic missile should be more than capable of hitting them with immense precision. And there's more. The UK wants this new missile to be fast and survivable, both in the air and on the ground. For the latter, the UK wants to make Project Nightfall launchable by mobile vehicles, which will allow Ukraine to fire several of the new missiles in quick succession before its vehicles move away and reposition at another location. The Express calls this the shoot-and-scoot tactic, and it's one that Ukraine has used to great effect against Russia. The idea is to have mobile platforms you can use in attacks. Once those mobile platforms have done what they came to do, they leave so quickly that Russia isn't able to launch counterattacks against them. Russia can attack the positions where those platforms were when they fired, but by the time it does, it'll be hitting nothing but empty ground. That's what the UK wants for Project Nightfall. And when the ballistic missile is complete, this mobility may make it one of the strongest weapons that Ukraine has in its arsenal. However, there are a couple of caveats. The first is that Project Nightfall isn't the cheapest weapon in the world. Each missile will come with an £800,000 or $1.07 million price tag, which is roughly equivalent to what a single Storm Shadow missile costs the UK. It's also unclear if the UK will be donating Project Nightfall missiles to Ukraine once they're ready, or if Ukraine will be buying them from the UK. Either way, the intended production run of 10 missiles per month means that there will only be 120 of these missiles made annually. Ukraine will have to be selective about its targets to make the most out of these new missiles, especially as it seems that the UK may be intending to keep some for itself. The second caveat is that Project Nightfall is still in the early stages of development, meaning it may be months or perhaps even more than a year before the missile makes its way into Ukraine. In its report, the Kyiv Post hints at the possibility that Project Nightfall could be operational by late 2026, though the other dates that it shares seem to contradict that hint. For a start, the UK's Ministry of Defence has set a 12-month deadline for test firings to take place, meaning the missile may only be on the verge of being tested by the end of 2026. That depends on how quickly the 3 chosen contractors operate, of course. It'll also depend on how quickly the Ministry of Defence moves. The Kyiv Post says that the ministry has set a deadline of February 9th to receive proposals from contractors that are interested in taking on the project. The ministry also says that the 3 development contracts are aimed to be awarded in March 2025. Aimed to be awarded is a far cry from will definitely be awarded, suggesting the Ministry of Defence is already giving itself some leeway for potential delays. But if everything goes to plan, Project Nightfall will be taking part in flight tests by the early days of January 2027, and hopefully before. It may even be fully operational by that point. Still, it seems that this is a weapon that won't be landing in Ukraine until 2027 unless something remarkable happens during the development stages. It may take a little while for the UK to unleash Putin's worst fear, but when it does, there are several reasons why the arrival of Project Nightfall will matter to Ukraine and Russia. The first is that Project Nightfall is a ballistic missile, meaning it will go at least some way to helping Ukraine even out the score on the ballistic missile strike front against Russia. And Russia has made good use of its many cruise and ballistic missiles to hurt Ukraine. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, highlights that Russia's use of missiles and drones has risen dramatically since the beginning of Putin's supposed special military operation. During the first 2.5 years of the conflict, Russia's combined missile and drone strikes were regular but relatively small. It wasn't until August 2024 that Russia broke the 200 barrier in terms of how many of these projectiles it had launched against Ukraine in a single day. But since then, the 200 range has ended up being on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to Russia's missile and drone attacks. The first half of 2025 saw Russia ramp these strikes up enormously, easily averaging 400 to 450 and sometimes reaching above 500 drones and missiles fired at Ukraine in a single day. CSIS notes that there was a lull in August 2025 before Russia's aerial campaign ramped up again. It's now common for a Russian drone and missile strike to include 600 projectiles or more. The same outlet also reported that October 2025 marked one of Russia's most intense months for aerial strikes. It noted that Putin's forces unleashed about 5,300 Shahid-type drones against Ukraine in that month alone. along with 74 cruise missiles and 148 ballistic missiles. Though all of these projectiles can cause damage, it's the latter that causes Ukraine major problems. Ballistic missiles are powerful, and because they are fast and travel in an arc toward their targets, they are incredibly difficult to intercept. And Russia has a lot of these types of missiles. Bloomberg discussed several of them in a January 9th piece. Russia's Iskander-M seems to be the most similar to the Project Nightfall missile, as it has the same 500-kilometer range and is classified as a short-range ballistic missile. Russia has used it frequently in deadly attacks on Ukraine, firing them from its own territory close to the border. Iskander launchers can carry 2 missiles on one vehicle, Bloomberg says of the missile. But there are many others. The Tochka-U is another ballistic missile, though its 120-kilometer or 74.5-mile range makes it a little less versatile than some of the others that Russia has in its arsenal. Putin can also bring the terrifying power of the Kinzhal and Oreshnik to Ukraine, with both of these missiles being capable of reaching hypersonic speeds. The former may even be able to travel as fast as 10 times the speed of sound, making it close to impossible for most air defense systems to intercept it. Russia has also used Oreshnik recently, launching an overnight attack on which Al Jazeera reported on January 10th, which saw Russia claim to have used an Oreshnik to strike the Ukrainian city of Lviv. Russia has presented a major ballistic missile threat to Ukraine since the beginning of the war. It's taken a while for Ukraine to start catching up. In fact, it's still trying to catch up, as the majority of Ukraine's ballistic missile threat comes from the missiles that it's received from its Western allies. The Bloomberg article we mentioned earlier makes mentions of both the Storm Shadow and ATACMS. Storm Shadows come from the UK, or from France with their alternate name of Scalp, whereas ATACMS comes from the United States. Both are only available to Ukraine in limited quantities, with ATACMS also coming with strings attached, as we'll get to in a moment. As for Ukraine's own ballistic missiles, they exist, but they are only recently starting to poke their heads out. The Kyiv Post says that Ukraine also has access to some Tochka-U ballistic missiles, which are Soviet-era weapons that were likely left behind in Ukraine when the Soviet Union collapsed. However, the low range of these missiles means they're only really useful to Ukraine for attacks on border territories or in the Russian rear in occupied Ukraine. Domestically, Ukraine has focused far more on building drones than it has on its ballistic missile production, though that is slowly starting to change. Ukraine is building its own ballistic missiles named Hrim-2 or Sapsan, and it's just started to use them. In fact, the first use of the Sapsan is believed to have happened by mid-December 2025, as you'll discover if you check out our video covering the missile's potential usage and what it delivers to Ukraine. The arrival of Project Nightfall means another Western-made ballistic missile is coming to Ukraine, but it's a missile that will arrive from the UK, which will make Ukraine much happier than a similar missile arriving from the US. Why? Well, another reason that Project Nightfall is so important to Ukraine is that the missile will help to US-proof Ukraine's ballistic missile stockpiles. The Kyiv Post made that clear in the introduction to its report on the UK's new ballistic missile, where it states, Britain will develop new tactical ballistic missile that would, once operational, just possibly in late 2026, return to Ukraine's strike planners the ability to hit protected targets deep inside Russia with powerful, precision-guided munitions, PGMs. It's the part about returning the ability of Ukraine's strike planners to hit protected targets in Russia that matters here. Ukraine technically has the capability already. The ATACMS missiles provided by the US allow Ukraine to destroy the types of targets that it will want to hit with Project Nightfall inside Russia. And before the current US President Donald Trump took office, Ukraine had just started to do that with these missiles. After a long wait, former President Joe Biden granted Ukraine permission to start using ATACMS inside Russia in November 2024. Ukraine wasted no time in taking advantage of this permission, as it hit an air defense system and an air defense base in the Kursk region of Russia within days of Biden's announcement. If Ukraine had its way, ATACMS would have become one of its most important weapons in 2025, but that's not how things worked out. When Trump became US president, the White House started to take a more conciliatory and at times sympathetic tone toward Putin. Trump also started placing pressure on Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to sign a peace deal. However, it wasn't until August 2025 that we learned that part of these pressure tactics seemed to involve blocking Ukraine from using all US-supplied long-range missiles to strike targets on Russia's territory. The Guardian reports that this ban was in place from at least the late spring of 2025, adding that the US had created a new review mechanism through which Ukraine had to submit requests to use ATACMS. That system also gave US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth final approval over whether Ukraine could use ATACMS inside Russia or not. By the time of the August report, Ukraine had yet to make a successful request since the new review system came into place. things did start changing toward the end of 2025. On November 18th, almost a year to the day that Biden initially granted approval, the Kyiv Independent reported that Ukraine had confirmed the use of ATACMS to strike a target inside Russia. It seems that the soft ban on ATACMS usage had been lifted by the US, though for how long that situation will last, Ukraine doesn't know. And that's the problem with ATACMS. As useful as the missile is to Ukraine, the country knows that it will only be able to use it when the US gives it the go-ahead. It only takes the political wind changing, as it has done so many times since Trump took office, for the US to go from saying yes to ATACMS usage to banning it again. One of the goals of Project Nightfall is to ensure that Ukraine can continue carrying out long-range strikes using ballistic missiles regardless of Ukraine's relationship with the US at any given time. The UK even touched on this in a statement where it said, "Nightfall is intended to provide Ukraine with a powerful, cost-effective long-range strike option with minimal foreign export controls. With fewer export controls comes a greater ability on Ukraine's part to use Nightfall for its intended purpose." No wonder Putin is afraid of the UK's new weapon. It ensures that Ukraine can maintain its already effective deep strike strategy with a ballistic missile, the use of which isn't beholden to the whims of the US government. Even without Nightfall, Ukraine has proven itself more than capable of hurting Russia at range with its own drones and missiles. It did just that in response to the Russian Oreshnik attack that we mentioned earlier. Ukraine's devastating revenge was instant, wide-ranging, and destructive. You can find out all about it in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest Western weapons due to arrive in Ukraine. And thank you as always for watching.